Hey guys, Vinnie Mirchandani here. Real pleasure to have Neeracha Taychakhoonavudh. She's got an even longer name than I do. Hey Neeracha, good to have you on. She leads industries. She's EVP at Industries at Salesforce. And so we're going to have a really interesting discussion on acrobatics and other trends in different industries. Neeracha, welcome on board. And give us a quick overview of your background and the industries you cover.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here, Vinny. Super excited to have this conversation. Neeracha Taychakhoonavudh, as you said, in case anyone wonders, the name is from Thailand. And I have been at Salesforce for a little over 10 years. My current role is running our industry's go-to-market function, which is really the nexus of expertise, of deep expertise around industries at Salesforce. And we really provide the strategy, the thought leadership, the point of view, and we focus very much on teaching the company to understand the industries and to understand the common trends and challenges and how Salesforce products are a fit to solve some of those challenges.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I know many of your company's locations are in hotspot cities around this crisis. Is everyone doing okay? Have you done okay so far through the COVID crisis?
Yes, we have. I mean, right from the start in, early March, we actually had almost all of our global offices shut down almost exactly on the same day. So they're still all hard closed today. And we're luckier than many companies because we had a very strong remote working infrastructure. A lot of our teams are field-based. They were already working not in an office hub. So that was great. And the first priority was really to take care of all of our employees, right? To make sure that they knew where to go. We had like a COVID-19 resource center stood up really fast, an internal site that was a list of resources, our command center if employees needed help, keeping track of testing and infections, for example, and told everyone that initial priority is really to take care of themselves and their family. So we had a pretty rapid response, and now we've been in this state for, what is it, like nine plus weeks now.
That's great to hear because you're not a small company. That's great to hear. Neeracha, I'm on my business school's dean's advisory board, and I forgot to ask him last week. We had an advisory meeting. I wanted to ask him, Dean, you taught us a lot of things, but you never taught us how to navigate a crisis this deep. How does the executive team find the inspiration? Where do you get the leadership, the resilience, inspiration? Because there's no script for this, right?
Right. Well, as Mark says, there's no playbook, and he says, this is our first pandemic. So for us, it's been interesting, as a longtime employee to see, but everything is very consistent. We have been very much led by our values, values-based leadership, and our 4 company-wide values, which any one of Salesforce's 55,000 employees could tell you are trust, customer success, innovation, and equality. And so Mark and the whole executive team really modeled leading with empathy, and really just focused on our employees first by increasing the cadence of communications, right? We have very transparent weekly company all hands calls that happen on Wednesday morning. We have, fun stuff to keep people entertained, like employee talent shows that happen in the work group level and also company-wide. And then we have daily wellness sessions to really help people through this time where everyone's kind of dealing with things a little bit differently. So we have these daily Be Well sessions with guest speakers, and we've had Trevor Noah, Ariana Huffington, and medical experts like Dr. Larry Brilliant and Dr. David Agus. In fact, those went so well that we opened up all those to live streaming to the whole world, so the public can actually get on those daily Be Well sessions for us.
How about your mascots? Have they been playing a role?
Well, our mascots have been socially distancing very safely. So we will see them, maybe not live, but very active pictures of them.
Actually, let's turn to the verticals. We've obviously been seeing all kinds of what I call acrobatics, heroics in healthcare, manufacturers jumping into medical ventilator production, distilleries doing hand sanitizers, last mile logistics, just fantastic innovation, scaling, obviously work from home, acrobatics, and so on. Let's go into the 6 verticals that you cover. Tell us about some acrobatics you've seen or heard in your customer base.
Well, I think the most active industries immediately when, when we were kind of starting out on the journey we've had over the past 9 weeks have been healthcare and then public health. So Salesforce has been very much focused on public health. We are working with the city of New York, something Mayor de Blasio announced about a week ago on contact tracing. We're working with the state of California, where, between our partners, Accenture and Amazon, as well as Salesforce, have a data platform that over 20,000, people who are the new contact tracers will be using to keep all this data safe. So public health, besides New York City and state of California, we do a lot of work in Seattle, state of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, state of Louisiana. Public health and around contact tracing and maintaining health and wellness has been just an explosion of activity. So every week we're hearing about, very, very fast deployments. And that's really key. The nature of our platform enables that flexibility and fast deployment, and our extremely, mobile first, user-friendly interface means that you could have hired, 1,000 contact tracers, had them put the app on their phone, and intuitively it's super easy to use. So public health is probably the first and foremost. Secondly, healthcare, as I mentioned, especially on the provider side, so hospital systems, clinics, have been inundated, right? They are, the frontline workers, and really thank you to everyone out there in the healthcare industry. But what we saw from a lot of providers was just an inundation of questions into their call centers, their service centers. Just people in the beginning just had a lot of questions, didn't know where to go, either called the doctor or the hospital, what have you. So the first and most urgent thing we stood up for a lot of the providers was essentially either bots or more self-service knowledge, or just increased volume as, perhaps workers were remotely trying to service a call center. That entire service side of things was the #1 spike we saw in healthcare. And those 2 industries were the most active ones to start out with.
And on the tracing, are you going to be compatible with what Apple and Google are talking about, or are states looking at different solutions? Whoever wins in this process.
Yeah. I think everyone is looking at different solutions. So what Salesforce has done is really enabled manual contact tracing. That means you need a person to either go interview the individual, or you need consent and you need a human interaction. It is not automated, Bluetooth based, location contact tracing off of an individual's phone, for example, because the consent and the manual nature of it, we feel kind of helps us tread that line, between what we need to do for public health and privacy and security concerns.
Sure. That's helpful. So let's talk about some of the other industries. It seems like certainly healthcare, barriers to entry seem to have dropped, right? Everybody's saying, oh my God, it's 20% of the GDP. They've seen the opportunity that they should get a piece of it, either because it's a new market opportunity or because it's going to affect every one of their employees. So both ways, healthcare is seeing a lot of new entrants, or at least dreaming to be entrants, right? It seems like in banking, with this new PPP loans, community banks are getting a shot of the business, and the bigger banks have fumbled the ball a little bit. Clearly they have much more scale, but the community banks have got a shot. Are you seeing similar concerns and opportunities when you talk to different vertical executives?
Mm-hmm. Well, the concerns and opportunities they have a similar thread, but they're all slightly different, right? For example, when we went into crisis mode and offices closed, certain industries were better placed to enable remote work immediately, right? And many of those industries we play very well in. They've spent the investment and time in digitizing their processes and enabling the infrastructure ahead of time. So I think the immediacy was how do you get people, how do you enable your employees to continue being productive when they can't come in the office? So that was kind of a big first wave where we saw a lot of demand across all the industries. But to your specific questions on healthcare, it was a lot around consumer response. And then on financial services, we actually did a lot of work along with our partners Accenture and a great ISV partner called Encino around creating those PPP portals for the regional banks, like you said, who had an opportunity to really get these loans for their customers. We also had large banks using it, but we had an explosion of activity around phase one PPP, which, there was a lot of hiccups because people were just not prepared about the nuance and the explosion of demand. And then I think phase two went a lot better. So for us on the fin side, they had already done a lot of process digitalization. That is one of our leading industries. But SBA PPP was a huge opportunity for the banks to really help their constituencies and really kind of create that bridge into the SBA process. So that was a flurry of activity for quite a few weeks. And now, there are other programs coming down the line. The Main Street Lending Program. I mean, there's actually, if you look at like the list of programs where if I, as a small business owner, wanted to try to get funding from the government, there's actually a plethora, all with slightly different rules. So really trying to help our customers explain to their banking customers what it all means.
You're right. I mean, it's a very traumatic time for a lot of small businesses. So if you can help, that'd be fantastic. What about some of the other verticals?
Well, you mentioned manufacturing a little bit earlier. So manufacturing for us, again, there's the whole, how do you digitalize? And if your employees end up being remote, how do you ensure productivity? So there's a little bit of that, but a huge, as you alluded to, Vinnie, a pivot from a lot of manufacturers to focus on ventilators, PPE, creating sanitizers, like some of the things you mentioned. So we have, for example, a great customer called Tentcraft, not a huge company, but they made tents for events. So, not a lot of events going on, right?
Right.
So they pivoted very quickly from a supply chain perspective to actually produce tents for their portable medical tents. So for screening, containment, right? Drive-through screenings, then you have a big opening for the vehicle to come through, and they're a big Salesforce customer, and they did that. We also have other customers who, either they were like some sort of process manufacturing that could convert to, if they were doing like a distillery, if they were more in the liquids, they could go to sanitizer. And then ventilator production has been a really big one. In fact, we saw so much demand for that Salesforce released a specific solution called Salesforce Care for Manufacturing that really was designed to help manufacturers who were pivoting to some sort of product that was essentially a COVID-19 response, that actually gave them the ability to manage the supply chain, figure out partners, right? New ingredients coming in from new partners, and really look at the demand and how to match, the supply and demand. And that's something we released under the Salesforce Care product suite that was really designed to help businesses stabilize.
Isn't it great to hear all these wonderful innovations and agility in all the doom and gloom. The VC was telling me about one of his portfolio companies that sells salads and, you know, healthy snacks through kiosks. And they used to sell them at corporate cafeterias and airports. Well, the market died overnight. So the CEO could have laid off most of his employees, but he said, no, I'm going to sell that same product to hospitals. I'm going to sell it to the schools that are open. And the VC said they're up to 90% of their revenues. So it's great to see people who are pivoting, you know, doing what I call acrobatics. Any other industry examples?
Well, to your point about pivoting, right? It's easier to pivot if you already are running in the cloud, if you have kind of an agile platform and systems. And I think that's what we've really seen. I've spent a lot of time with retail, for example, and in retail, it's kind of feast and famine, right? If you are a mass market or grocery, you know, in that area, whether you're a Target or, you know, Kroger or any one of the various grocery chains, you know, it's a feast, right? Your business is booming. And then if you are in a department store, you know, you're in luxury, it's, you know, there's not a lot going on. So spending time with our retail customers has been really interesting because they do face different challenges depending what segment they're in. But what we heard from this retail CTO who's in essentially the beauty space, you know, she told us, she's like, we got more done in the past 4 weeks than I was able to get done in the past 3 years.
Wow.
Because, you know, we needed to do some things to enable buy online, pick up in store, right? Or shipping from a store. I couldn't ever get those investments made. And then boom, right? We absolutely need, the store needs to close. So how are you going to utilize that store in a digital strategy? So we definitely heard a lot about how the pivot, because digital was kind of not a choice to continue business, right? You had to get up and running. We heard a lot of these stories from essentially the digital evangelists who live in companies about how, you know, my CEO never wanted to talk to me about omnichannel. I was trying to tell him we really need to figure out how to get our store strategy and our digital strategy on the same wavelength. He never wanted to talk about it. You know, 3 days after this hit and we closed our stores, he called me up and said, how do I ship from a store? Right? All this inventory is locked up in dark stores. How do I get access to that inventory, merge it with the inventory from my distribution center, and figure out if a customer orders something, where is the inventory and what is the cheapest and easiest way and fastest way to get it to them? So it's interesting. There are new opportunities in the midst of all this crisis.
Are these starting to show up as feature requests for future releases, or is it still too early?
It's a little early. I mean, what we've done is certainly listen to a lot of customers. I mentioned Salesforce Care for Manufacturing as kind of a, you know, and we think about the world in 3 phases, right? There's stabilizing, that immediate shock. And a lot of what was going on in that phase was, how do I get my people to work from home? How do I deal with spikes to my call center? And we consider kind of our manufacturing solution in that bucket. But then what we're hearing from our customers now is, okay, we've been in this for a while. We've kind of got the hang of it. How are we going to reopen our workplace? And that workplace could be an office. It could be a factory. It could be a distribution center. It could be a retail store. And so we very much focused on creating a solution for that. We call it under umbrella of work.com, but really creating it as not only emergency response management for public health, which we've already talked about, that's something we're doing, but also for our commercial clients, because how are you going to get your people back to the workplace, right? It is going to be contact tracing in a limited manner around your employees. It'll be things like shift management, right? That people don't all come in at the same time, so you have the room to keep some social distancing. It could be, you know, daily employee wellness checks. So our whole work.com suite is really designed around how the workforce comes back. And that has come from, it's not, I don't know if I call it a new feature, but they're definitely leveraging our platform with new apps that we actually saw a lot of customers the increase in the number of platforms being, a number of apps being built on our platform was considerable. So customers were already thinking this. They're like, okay, well, maybe I can write something on my existing Salesforce platform to do employee wellness checks. Well, then we made it into an app, and so it's part of our work.com suite.
I've heard from several executives that the closing down was tough. The opening up is turning out to be way more complex, way more complex. So I'm sure your work.com is going to be useful to a number of people. I've heard from Anil Bushri, the CEO of Workday. He was talking about how the cloud has scaled in this phase. And he kind of joked. He says, if I'd still been at PeopleSoft, his previous company, he said, I would have been shipping out servers to my customers to keep up with the loads. I'm sure. Tell us about your experience with cloud scaling and how you have, met your increased volumes and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it's links into the previous topic we were talking about being in the cloud. First of all, has enabled customers to pivot and be more agile, and figure out how to connect their processes in a different way, but because the traditional way wasn't working. So that's pretty important for us. We looked at spikes, and we have seen spikes across the board. But if you were to look at something specific like SBA PPP, we knew when the loans were starting to be released. So we have a command center within our customer success group. There is a daily stand-up. We were looking at the loads, what servers, what data centers they were hitting. And it was a very well-managed process to understand, okay, we're processing, billions in loans. I mean, our estimates are like 100 billion in loans in the first phase alone came through Salesforce. And partners, right? Partners like Encino, as I mentioned. So we had the daily stand-up with infrastructure people on, kind of monitoring the volumes and expected volumes, and then switching the loads as necessary. So it was because that was a very predictable spike in terms of time, we spent an awful lot of time on that. And we do that on, different industries, different regions as well.
You should get Mr. Mnuchin to say nice things about Salesforce. I'm sure he's waiting to see if it's declared a success, right? There's been a lot of hiccups, I can see. But thank you on behalf of small businesses for doing that. So I've been asking everybody, do you see a V recovery, sharp rebound? Do you see a U, kind of a gradual recovery? Do you see a W, flare up here, a spike there, and slows things down? Or do you see an L? It's going to be dead for a while.
Gosh, the optimist in me wants it to be a V, right? And the stock market, seems to be weirdly expecting a V, because I look at the market every day. But the realist thinks it's more likely going to mirror whatever the infection rate, graph, the curve for the pandemic. And I think many people are warning us that even if it abates now as we go into the summer, there is the danger of a resurgence in the fall. And we still need to be vigilant. And so the realist in me probably says it's a W, right? We're going to come back, and then maybe we will backslide. I wish for a V though. I wish for a V.
Let's hope for that. What other advice would you give to your peers in the software industry? Let me preface it. One of your competitors, I listened to one of their virtual events, and then I fed them this feedback. They waited till minute 50 to talk about a COVID mobile app they had developed for a hospital chain. They talked about a retailer and completely ignored the fact that the retailer was closed, and they missed the opportunity to talk about the supply chain and logistics. They had a food chain, and they talked about their CRM, completely neglected the workplace hygiene, curbside pickup, and so on. What would you obviously in the last half an hour have talked about a bunch of examples. What advice would you give to your fellow software executives about some of the short-term changes that are going on?
Well, one of the key priorities at Salesforce, and it comes right down from the top, is be relevant. Right? You have got to, it's clearly, no one is talking about anything else. It is not business as usual anywhere in our customer base. So not only creating specific solutions, work.com is one of them. I mean, there was feedback. We, as a workplace, were kind of wrestling with how we reopen our own workplace. It seemed really obvious that that's where we needed to go. So I think the number one piece of advice is be relevant. You can't ignore that, people, vast quantities of people around the world have been sheltering in place for quite some time, and businesses are hugely affected by that. And in light of the uncertainty, I go back to kind of one of the first questions you asked me, Vinnie, is around values-based leadership, right? You have to be true to your true north as a company. And for us as a company, ever since we were founded in 1999, that customer success, focusing on what customers needs, listening to customers, that's the heart of Salesforce. And you have to go back to that, because if you are tone deaf and you keep trying to kind of barrel down this highway to make your number in the old way, if you're a tech company, that's just not going to be well received. That empathy, that trust, you have to be there. And that's the most important thing.
Great advice, Neeracha. Hey, a couple of optimistic things. So I did a call last night with an executive in Hong Kong. And guess what? He was in his office. They've had a V recovery. So there's hope for all of us. And then, I heard Warren Buffett do his annual meeting. And he's 89, and he did a virtual one. And he said, this is the first time I'm using slides. So, and then he goes, Charlie Munger, my longtime partner, who's 96, has become a Zoom fanatic. So there's hope for all of us if those old senior citizens can get into digital usage. So thank you so much. This has been great. Appreciate all your input, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.